For 11 years, I believed a performance review was just a record of something that had already happened. You do the work. Someone writes it down. You sign it. It goes in a drawer. That's what I believed until the afternoon my manager, Paul, walked me through mine, line by line. He used the words exceeded expectations. He said them twice. I signed it. An hour later, he emailed me a copy, and I saved it the way I save everything. For months after that, I was told I hadn't been promoted. The reason, secondhand and soft, was concerns about my performance. Concerns. So I opened the review in my file to read it again. It wasn't the same review. The rating was a full band lower. There was a development plan I had never seen for problems no one had ever raised with me. And my signature was still sitting at the bottom of a document I had never actually signed. I had two versions of the same review. Only one of them was the one I signed. I needed to know who wrote the other one. I had been a senior operations analyst at the company for 11 years. I want to be honest about what that meant to me, because it matters for everything that came after. I wasn't chasing a title. I liked being the person others checked with before a number went upstairs. When a forecast was wrong, people came to my desk first. That kind of quiet trust takes years to build, and I had built it. Paul had managed me for the last 4 of those years. He was not a war man by nature, which is exactly why his praise carried weight. He didn't hand it out to be liked. So when we sat down that afternoon in March for my annual review, and he read the summary line and said exceeded expectations, and then said it again a paragraph later, I felt something settle in me. I had earned it. I signed the review on the tablet he slid across the table. At 4:47 that same afternoon, a copy landed in my inbox, a clean PDF, my name on it. I saved it into the folder where I keep everything that might matter someday. I didn't think it would. There had been talk, the kind that is never official, that a lead analyst position was opening and that I was the obvious name for it. Paul had nodded when I mentioned it. Not a promise, a nod. In my 11 years, I had learned that a nod from Paul was usually enough. Then July came, and the position was filled by someone from another group, and no one told me directly. I heard it in a hallway. When I finally asked Paul, he wouldn't quite meet my eye. He said the committee had had some concerns. He said it the way you say a word you've been told to say. Concerns about what? That was the crack. Nothing about the last year had told me there were concerns. The review in my hand said the opposite. I did what I always do when something doesn't add up. I went looking for where it was written down. I started with the people who should have been able to explain it. I asked Paul again, more directly this time, in his office with the door closed. He talked around it. He said promotion decisions weren't only about performance, that there were headcount realities, that timing was hard this year. Every sentence was true, and none of them was an answer. So I went one level up to the skip-level director and asked the same thing in a careful email. She replied in 2 lines. The decision had been made by the calibration committee based on documented performance, and she was confident the process had been fair. Documented performance. That phrase stopped me. A hallway opinion is smoke. Documentation is paper. If there was a document that said I hadn't earned the promotion, it existed somewhere I could read it, and it would have to square with the review I'd signed in March. In my experience, those 2 things always squared because they were supposed to be the same thing. I told myself I was overreacting. I told myself I would open my file, see exceeded expectations, and feel foolish for worrying. I logged into the HR self-service portal that night from home, found the performance section, and opened the current review. I read the summary line first, the way you check the score before the story. It did not say exceeded expectations. It said partially meets expectations. I sat there and read it 3 times because my first instinct was that I had misremembered my own review. That is what these things do to you first. They make you doubt your memory before you doubt the document. I scrolled down. Under a heading I did not recognize called Development Plan, there were 3 bullet points. One said I needed to improve cross-team communication. One said I needed to demonstrate more consistent ownership. One said I needed to build executive presence. I had never seen those words. No one had ever said them to me, not in the meeting, not before it, not after. And at the bottom of the page, under all of it, was my signature and the date. March 3rd, the day I signed a different review. I want to be careful here about what I felt, because it wasn't rage, not yet. It was a kind of vertigo. The ground I had stood on for 11 years, the belief that the record matched the work, had just moved under me. But I still had the copy Paul emailed me. I had saved it, so I did the only thing that would tell me whether I was losing my mind or being lied to. I opened both versions side by side. The header was identical. My name, my title, the review period, the March 3rd date, all the same. The signature at the bottom was the same signature. For a moment, they looked like the same document, and that was the most disorienting part because they were almost the same, which meant someone had wanted them to look the same. Then I got to the summary line. My copy said exceeded expectations. The filed copy said partially meets. My copy had no development plan at all, not the heading, not the 3 bullets. The section simply wasn't there in the version I signed. Everything a promotion committee would have read to decline me existed only in the version I had never seen. I had 2 versions of one review. Same date, same signature, opposite meaning. A document does not rewrite itself. Someone had taken the review I signed in March and made another one and put my name and my signature on it and filed it as the truth. The question was no longer what happened to me. The question was when and by whom. I am an analyst. When I don't understand something, I look at the data underneath it, and every digital document carries data underneath it. I right-clicked my saved PDF and opened its properties. Created March 3rd for 46 in the afternoon. That matched the email in my inbox to the minute. That was the real one. Then I did the same to the copy from my file. I had downloaded it from the portal, so its properties came with it. Created March 3rd. But the modified date was not March 3rd. It was March 14th at 2:31 in the afternoon. 11 days after I signed my review, someone had opened it and changed it. I remember staring at that timestamp longer than it deserved, the way you stare at a number that reorganizes everything around it. Because it settled one thing completely. This was not a clerical mix-up, not 2 drafts confused for each other. My review had been finished, signed, and emailed on the 3rd. It sat untouched for 11 days. Then, on the afternoon of the 14th, it was edited into something worse and filed as final. 2:30 on a Tuesday. Someone had been at a desk with my review open, deciding I partially met expectations 11 days after my manager told me I exceeded them. I checked the one other thing I could check on my own. I went back into my sent folder and found the read receipt from the March 3rd email, confirming Paul had opened the copy he sent me that same afternoon. He had the real version. He had opened it. There was no world in which he thought partially meets was what he'd walked me through. I didn't know who had made the edit yet, but I knew the exact minute it happened. I knew the real version had existed and been read, and that was more than most people ever get. I couldn't see who had made the edit. The portal doesn't show that to employees. So I went to the one person who might, and who I thought I could trust to be straight with me. Diane Okafor, our HR business partner. Diane had been with the company longer than I had, and she had a reputation for being the rare HR person who told you the uncomfortable version rather than the smooth one. I didn't accuse anyone. I showed her the 2 files, the 2 summary lines, the 2 timestamps, and I asked her to help me understand how one document became 2. She looked at them for a long time. Then she said a word I hadn't heard before in this context. Calibration. She explained it the way you explain something you've stopped questioning. Before ratings are finalized, managers meet as a group, a calibration session, and they compare their teams and adjust scores so that no single manager is too generous or too harsh. Ratings move in that room, she said. Up and down. It's normal. It's meant to be fair. I asked if a rating could move a full band from exceeds to partially meets in that room. She hesitated and said it would be unusual, but not impossible, if the distribution required it. Something loosened in my chest for just a second, because if this was a process, then maybe it wasn't personal, maybe I hadn't been singled out by someone who disliked me. And then the second thought arrived and was worse than the first. If this was a process, if scores were being moved in a room to fit a shape, then I was almost certainly not the only file that had been rewritten on the 14th. I asked Diane a careful question. Was mine the only rating that changed that cycle? She said she couldn't share other people's reviews, which was the right answer, and also, I noticed, not a no. I left her office understanding that I had been looking at this too small. I had been treating it as a thing that happened to me. It might be a thing that happened to a lot of us, and I was simply the one who had saved the receipt. Comparing reviews is something people don't do. It feels like comparing salaries, a little shameful, a little dangerous. But I needed to know if the shape I was seeing was real, and there was one person I trusted enough to ask. Marcus Lowe sat 2 desks down. Strong analyst, quiet, well-liked, 8 years in. In July, he had been passed over 2, and I remembered thinking it was strange because Marcus was good. I found him at the coffee machine, and I didn't dress it up. I told him I thought my review had been changed after I signed it, and I asked, carefully, whether his head ever fell off. He went still. Then he told me his own version of the same afternoon. His manager had praised him in his review meeting, told him he'd had a strong year. And when the promotions came out and he asked why, someone mentioned a development plan. He had never seen a development plan either. I asked him to pull up his filed review while we stood there. Partially meets expectations. And under the heading, 3 bullet points. Improve cross-team communication. Demonstrate more consistent ownership. Build executive presence. Word for word, the same 3 lines that were in mine. 2 people do not independently receive the identical 3-sentence development plan by coincidence. Nobody writes the same failings, in the same order, in the same words, for 2 different people on their own. That boilerplate came from one place, which meant somewhere there was a single source, a template, a decision applied to a list of names, and Marcus and I were 2 entries on it. I stopped thinking of this as my problem then. It had a shape now, and the shape had more than one name in it. I needed the record of who had actually made the changes, and that lived somewhere I couldn't reach. Every edit in the HR system is logged. The system stamps who opened a document, when, and what they changed. Employees never see that log. HR can pull it. I went back to Diane. This time I didn't ask her to explain calibration. I asked her, as a formal matter, to pull the edit history on my own performance review, which I had the right to request. She was quiet for a moment, and I watched her decide something. Then she said she would look. 2 days later, she asked me to come by at the end of the day, when the floor was empty. She had the audit log for my review open on her screen, and next to it, though she didn't say whose it was, a second one with the same shape. My review had been edited once after I signed it. March 14th, between 2:10 and 2:50 in the afternoon. 40 minutes. The change was logged under an HR coordinator's login, not a manager's, and it was tagged with a category from a drop-down menu. Calibration adjustment. Attached to it was a manager approval. The second log, the one she didn't name, showed an edit inside the very same 40-minute window. Same login, same tag, same kind of approval attached. I looked at that for a while, and here is the thing I understood, sitting in that quiet office. Any one of those edits, taken alone, could be explained. A late correction, a policy note added, a score rounded to match a rubric. But 2 reviews, rewritten to say the same 3 things in the same 40 minutes, under the same login, carrying the same approval, are not a series of corrections. They are one decision executed once on more than one person. That was the moment it stopped being suspicion and became fact. Not a feeling. A log time-stamped, approved fact. There was only one piece left. The approval. Every edit carried a manager's sign-off, and Diane could see the name on it. I asked her whose approval was attached to mine. She didn't answer right away, and I think it was because she already knew what it would do to me. Then she turned the screen a little further toward me so I could read it myself. The approval was Paul's. Attached to the log was an email dated March 14th from Paul to the HR coordinator and the calibration committee. I read it twice. In it, he confirmed the calibrated ratings for his team as final and authorized them to be entered into the system. There was a list. My name was on it, next to partially meets. Marcus's name was on it too. The man who had sat across the table from me and said exceeded expectations twice had 11 days later signed his name to a document that put the opposite into my permanent record and authorized someone else to write it there for him. I want to describe what that did to me accurately because it wasn't a loud kind of hurt. It was quiet and very cold. Losing the promotion had been a disappointment. This was different. This was the discovery that the person I had trusted most in that building had known, had signed, and had let me walk around for 4 months believing the review he emailed me was the one that counted. I had the copy I signed. I had the timestamps. I had the audit log. I had his approval, in his own words. I had everything except the one thing evidence can't give you, which was an explanation. And there was only one place to get that. I asked Paul for 20 minutes. I didn't tell him why. I did not go in to shout. I have watched people burn their credibility by walking into a room hot, and I wanted my evidence to do the talking. I put 3 pages on his desk. My signed review from March 3rd, the filed version from the 14th, and the approval email with his name on it. I asked him to help me understand how they could all be true at once. He looked at the pages, and I watched him move through it in stages. First, he said it must be a version control error, that the system did strange things. I pointed to the modified date and to his own email. He stopped saying that. Then he minimized it. He said calibration was standard, that everyone's numbers moved, that I was reading too much into a routine process. I asked him if it was routine to write a development plan for problems he had never once raised with me in 4 years. He didn't answer that. Then, finally, he justified it, and that was the closest thing to the truth I got. He said the reduction targets had come down from above before calibration even started. A required distribution. A set percentage of every team had to land in partially meets or below, on paper, to support the headcount cuts that were already coming. The ratings weren't measuring us anymore. They were building a file to justify decisions that had already been made. I asked him why me. He was quiet, and then he said the thing I think he'd been avoiding saying to himself. If he protected everyone, the number would land on him. Someone on his team had to fill the quota, and I was senior enough to absorb it and not fragile enough to fall apart. He had chosen me because he thought I could take it. He wasn't a cartoon villain. That was almost the hardest part. He was a tired man who had been handed an ugly instruction and had chosen his own standing over mine, and had told himself it was just paperwork because paperwork felt survivable. I understood him. I did not forgive him. Those are different things. He assumed, I think, that would stay where he'd put it, buried in a file that no one ever reads twice. He didn't know I'd save the copy. He didn't know I would go looking. And now that I had, I was not going to let the false version be the one that stood. I brought everything to HR formally, not to Diane as a friend, but through the process, in writing with the documents attached. The signed copy, the 2 timestamps, the audit log, the approval email, and, with Marcus's permission, the fact that his review carried the identical development plan. The company's first instinct was the one I expected. Smooth it over. I was offered a quiet meeting where someone suggested my review could be revisited and everyone could move forward. I said no. I said the record was wrong, that it had been changed after I signed it, and that I wanted the true version restored, not a new negotiation. Documentation, it turns out, is very hard to argue with when it is complete. Timestamps don't get flustered. Audit logs don't change their story. What happened was not a scene. It was slower and more real than that. My filed review was corrected back to the version I signed on March 3rd, the partially meets rating and the invented development plan removed. Marcus's file was corrected too. The calibration practice that allowed a signed review to be rewritten to fit a quota was suspended and put under review by a committee that, for once, included someone from outside the department. The mandate above Paul, the required distribution, was named in that review as the root of it and was stopped for the next cycle. Paul kept his job. I had complicated feelings about that, and I still do. But it came with a formal finding in his own file, and he was removed from calibration authority. The nuance mattered to me more than a punishment would have. He had been under pressure he didn't create. The people who built the quota and pushed it down were named too. I didn't want a downfall. I wanted the truth to weigh the right amount on the right people. There was one more change, smaller than the others, and the one I was proudest of. The system was updated so that any edit to a signed review after the signature date now triggered an automatic notice to the employee. No one would ever again have their own record rewritten 11 days later and only find out by accident. That existed because I had saved an email. I made sure it was written down that way. My promotion case was reopened. I'll be honest that by then I no longer knew if I wanted it from them. But the case being reopened meant the record now said I had earned it, and that was the thing I had actually come for. I stayed another year, and then I left on my own terms for a role I chose. Paul, and I never got the relationship back. You can correct a document. You cannot unknow that someone signed their name to a lie about you and let you carry it for 4 months. We were polite. We were never easy again. What survived was smaller and more durable than I expected. It was the copy. The one I signed on March 3rd. The one I saved at 4:47 that afternoon out of nothing but habit. For a while I kept a printed page of it in a folder in my desk. Not because I needed it anymore, but because it reminded me of something I don't want to forget. The record almost lied about my entire year. And the only reason it couldn't was that I had kept the true version when no one told me it would matter. I think about how close it came to working. If I hadn't saved that email, the file version would simply have been the truth. That's the part that stays with me. Somewhere in every company there are files with people's names on them, and most of those people have never read their own twice. So I'll leave you with the question I keep coming back to. When was the last time you actually read what your record says about you? And would you know if someone had changed it? Tell me in the comments what you found the day you finally looked. And if these stories help you see the quiet machinery a little more clearly, stay with me on the channel. There's always another file worth reading twice.